In 2009, the developer Midway Games closed down, and immediately four of the artists who had been working there decided to form Atomhawk Design, a visual development studio for all sorts of media, but mostly video games. Meaning they don't actually create the games, they're hired by video game developers or other companies to work with them just on creating the concept art and other visual components for a project. To date, Atomhawk has produced 3 volumes of its artwork. I have so much respect and enthusiasm for their commitment to producing a series. Not only does the opinion of the individual books benefit from it, but it's also really interesting to chart the changes between volumes, sometimes for the better, sometimes not, but fascinating to witness these evolutions of the idea of an art book and particularly the challenges of producing anthological art books. But that'll become clearer in the videos on the subsequent volumes. I just want to make sure you understand this video is kind of just part 1 of a larger series. I actually think of this book as The Art of Atomhawk Volume 0. It's the primordial prequel to Atomhawk proper, both in terms of the company's history and work, but also in terms of the art books. And I say this for a couple of reasons. Today, Atomhawk's been operating for 14 years and has, I don't know, but I would have to be upwards of 50 employees worldwide. This book covers 2009 to 2011, just the first 2 years of their existence, where they went from like 4 to 7 employees. And there is only work from 3 artists in this book. It feels like 85% of the images are done by one guy, 14% by another, and then 1% by the last artist. But more than that, for a book called The Art of Atomhawk, it's debatable how much of the content actually represents the company's artwork. The intro mentions that by this time they had worked with 15 clients, but except for maybe like a couple of comic book pages and album covers, I don't think there's any of their client work in here. This was probably the biggest disappointment with the book, that games and stuff they worked on during this time do not have any representation here. That completely undermines everything else the book is doing so well to be a brilliant company showcase. It's a really weird, unfortunate, and damaging omission. I mean, there's not even a page listing all the projects they've worked on. Further adding to the weirdness is that where many of the games Atomhawk was hired to work on are completely absent, the 2 game titles that get the most focus are from their days at Midway Games, i.e. before Atomhawk existed. This isn't necessarily a problem at all, because 1, the art's great, and 2, it is all stuff done by the guys who founded Atomhawk, and so it's weird because technically I don't think it counts as Atomhawk work, but spiritually and artistically it does. By the way, those 2 games are Wheelman. I feel like almost half this book might as well be called The Art of Wheelman, which I don't mind because 1, there was no art book for Wheelman, so that's awesome because it makes this book a valuable, interesting, and exclusive source for that. 2, out of all the games featured in all 3 books, it's the one that gets the most robust and therefore satisfying showing. And 3, the curation is really, really good. They chose pieces that are visually exciting to look at, but that are also interesting in terms of capturing the types of artworks and their use. So there's also storyboards and breakdowns of how marketing images went through changes. Speaking of which, the thing the curation does better than most individual art books even, is that as you would hope from a visual development studio, they actually show visual development. So early and alternate stuff, and best of all, cut content. The book feels primarily focused on showing the unseen, i.e. one of the best curation decisions you can make for an art book. The crown jewel of which, and indeed the crown jewel of this book as far as I'm concerned, is all the content from the other Midway game included, called Necessary Force. I don't actually have any personal interest in this game at all, but what I love about its inclusion is that it was a cancelled game, and so from that sort of lost media perspective, I think that's another fantastic, valuable inclusion for the book. Because otherwise all the art and work put into that game would be rotting away on some server somewhere, never to be seen by anyone, unless at best one of the artists uploaded some of it to their portfolio. But those 2 games are really the only client work in the book, even if not technically Atomhawk clients. Again, except for like some comics and album stuff, what makes up the rest of the book are 2 things. The first is what I'll call internal projects, and I think they're really cool. They're almost like concepts and pitches for games that don't actually exist, or maybe because this was their early days, they're theoretical examples for their company portfolio to show the sort of work they can produce. I liked all that stuff, especially for an internal concept pitch for a game called Neo Racer, because after the 2 Midway games, that was the project that got the most content and was a great showing of the company's collaborative work. As opposed to the inclusions I found a little more questionable, which is the amount of personal pieces from the artists. Not because they're not visually wonderful. In fact, one of my personal joys from this book was all the stuff from Colin Kruger. I've been waiting forever for him to release a monograph. Despite that, I don't think all the personal pieces were the best choice for a book like this that is supposed to be a company showcase. Even if it is stuff that was done during work hours or whatever, when it just looks like some random stuff the artist could have done at home for themselves, it feels like it dilutes the idea of the book being on the company. Whereas those internal projects I mentioned can sometimes feel like they're in the same boat, but the difference is they feel like work done by the studio, or even if it is just done by one artist, at least more conceptually robust than solitary, unrelated vanity pieces. Again, particularly when that has been done while actual commissioned work done by the company is completely absent. On the one hand, I really like that the emphasis isn't just on making this a show reel showing off final client works and instead focusing more on company original and unseen stuff. That's a brilliant direction. But I also feel that to not have most projects they've worked on given at least their own spread, again, is disappointing and undermines the idea of the book, because now it doesn't give a true representation of the company's work and history. Perhaps they should have held off another year before publishing the book so they had more client stuff to show, because this book was only made just 2 years after the birth of the studio. However, despite that, once we get into the later volumes, it'll become clear that it may end up being a good thing they did this one when they did. Also, I love that even if maybe they did jump the gun a little in their excitement to get a book out, they were still able to produce something with enough content to be worth your time. All things considered, and in terms of what we usually see, I would have expected some sort of measly cheat of a book. But no, not at all. It's 190 pages, which is great, but more importantly, filled with a decent amount of content that's also visually great. What's not so great is that this book displays some of the most unnecessary, rampant and ridiculous uses I've ever seen of having images laid out across the gutter, and my god, is that saying something when 99% of art books seem to be designed by apes who don't actually seem to understand how a book works. I mean, look, it's not ruining the book, but it is shockingly stupid. Also, the paper quality, while not bad, is a touch shy of what it should be. So the way the content breaks down is the first 50 pages are on character art. The next 30-page chapter is called Action, which is basically narrative and key art that focuses on action, story, or marketing type pieces. Then the other 2 chapters are environment art with 60 pages and vehicle designs with 25 pages. Organizing the art by category like this was not the best move. It's clunky and obviously should have been organized chronologically by project and then personal works collected by artists in the back. Though I'm happy to say this is something that is rectified in later volumes. Except for 3 pages of early company history, the only text in the book are the captions that accompany every image. The content of the captions ranges from occasionally frustrating, often basic, but mostly great. So in terms of frustrating, that's because there's often a lack of context for what you're looking at. Especially bad when, with the works being organized by type of art rather than project, the captions need to be explicitly telling you where the art's from, but it often doesn't. Sometimes a caption will name the project it's from, and from there you kind of have to infer that the other images on the page and maybe following pages are from the same project based on them visually looking like they're from the same thing. But even that's tricky because there are personal works and things mixed throughout that sometimes look like they do belong, sometimes not, but are on the same page. I don't know. The point is it's too often unnecessarily confusing and unhelpful at something as simple as just letting you know what the art you're looking at was created for. Like the first 12 pages of the environment chapter is just all these city designs, but I have no idea what they were for, if anything. Are they just random examples made for the portfolio? Then say that. But also maybe they're not, cause later images that are visually similar do specifically name the project they're from. It's inconsistent and confusing when there's no context. But then other times the captions will contain enough context. Sometimes it's just basic caption information telling you what you're looking at, that's fine. Sometimes the captions and commentary they contain can also be describing the obvious or otherwise pointless. But the best use of the captions is when they frequently include really good artist commentary specific to the piece you're looking at. Even though it's only ever like one sentence about some random piece of art, obviously that doesn't amount to much, but at least it's interesting. I was not expecting that, and considering how it's also short and on a lot of disparate stuff, I was surprised by how frequently insightful and well used enough that it ends up being a great little feature worth being here, which is more than I can usually say for most art book commentary. Another book you may be interested in is The Art of Midway, which came out in 2007. I'm not sure how much art in there is from any of the Atomhawk guys, but I guess you could possibly see that book as something of a prequel to this Atomhawk series, particularly because there's no overlap in the work shown in either book, which is awesome. But more than that book, The Art of Atomhawk Volume 1 overall seems heavily inspired by an art book released the year before from their competitor studio, Massive Black. Their artists are great and the books are pretty good too. If you like this one, they're worth checking out, though personally I definitely prefer the Atomhawk ones, not the least of which reason is that Massive Black gave up after Volume 2. Boo, pathetic. So this book is sometimes odd, but always interesting, equal parts questionable and brilliant. The net result is something that is nonetheless enjoyable. But it's interesting because had I been reviewing this book at the time of release or just viewing it on its own, I think I'd find it too weird or misguided or otherwise dissatisfying. I just wouldn't like it as much. But instead, viewing it in the larger context of being part of a series of books, a lot of those problems end up contributing to the value of the larger experience. That's something exciting we'll see start to unfold in the next video on the very different Art of Atomhawk Volume 2.